Mambo Team Africa, Habaraya Asubui. This is your brother Konate from the organization known as We Charge Colonialism. Today's topic is bridging the gap. First off, I would like to say thank you to all of the African nations who requested that the UN Human Rights Division hold last week's debate on racism and police brutality in the United States of America. That is much appreciated. Um, can't thank you enough, Asante Sana. But with that being said, I want to talk about how we should and need to bridge the gap between Africans who are in the diaspora, be it the United States of America, the Caribbean, Canada, Europe, or wherever, and Africans on the continent. In addition to unifying Africans in the continent within um, the current colonial borders. Uh, what I need to say, some people might not like it, um, but it needs to be said, and we have to address it in order to go forward. Diasporans, um, you need to stop being so insensitive. Um, Continentals, you need to stop being so sensitive. Um, we are one. We are one people. We share ancestors. I know people like to talk about all of the tribes and all of the languages. When you start actually studying these migrations of tribes and you start linguistically looking into these languages, it's all the same thing. Um, and that's just the facts. I was watching a video last night on the history of the uh, Biafran War in Nigeria, and all those people died. And at the end of it, um, my conclusion was the climate for that war was set up by Britain, and then it was fueled by France. But the people who died were African, and that's from, I guess, the outside looking in. But if that's not true, somebody explain to me how it's not true. And I believe it's the same way um, with every conflict between African people. You have Europeans putting a battery in somebody's back or setting up a climate for certain situations to happen. And they're always the beneficiaries to that, not us. Um, there has been a renewed interest of back to Africa by a lot of people in the diaspora, and it seems that some brothers and sisters on the continent, um, they are a little bit leery. It seems that they expect for Africans returning from the diaspora to walk on eggshells, and to always use a super polite tone when addressing the issues that exist on the continent. And what I say is, um, yes, we should never be disrespectful. Um, nobody likes to be disrespected. But at the same time, just because somebody is telling you something that you don't want to hear doesn't mean they're being disrespectful either. It's just like if someone was to say that African American men don't protect African American women, I'm not going to say they disrespected me because they would just be stating the fact. I'm not gonna jump up and down about, well, I protect them, I protect them. I'm one person. When we have to learn that their general statements um, exists for a reason. Just because somebody makes a general exception doesn't mean it's exceptions. People shouldn't have to say some and not all and all that type of stuff. That's walking on eggshells. That's 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 trying to um, put sugar on feces. It's like we need to be straight up with each other. We need to be direct with each other, and we need to be loving with one another and not seeing each other um, as adversaries, competitors, enemies, outsiders, or any of that thing. Anybody who has skin like this is not a foreigner anywhere on the planet, you know. And so um, we need to be accepting of one another. We as African Americans, um, we want to learn more about African culture, and that's what we can get from continentals. But at the same time, people on the continent have to understand that there are changes that need to be made. If there weren't changes that need to be made, Africa would be in a better condition, and that's just a fact. That's not to be disrespectful to anybody. And a lot of times, due to our colonialization, we don't even realize what ideas are African and what ideas are imported. And sometimes we will hear something for the first time and we will say that that's a Western idea that's being brought to Africa, when in fact it's an African idea that's being brought back to Africa. It's just that because of colonialization, um, the continental person may have embraced what they uh, were taught through colonialism and not even know it. They just grew up with it and they accepted it as being the African way, when in fact it is a way that was introduced to them by the colonizers. Um, but a lot of African American YouTubers, I mean, uh, we have to think about end result too. It's like it's true that you shouldn't have to kiss your brothers or sisters butt to give them the truth. But at the same time, a lot of times, by us being emotional people, once you strike a person's nerve, they're not going to have the ability to comprehend anything you're saying after that. So if our end result is to heal our people and for us to come together and make Africa home again, make Africa great again, then we need to um, speak with um, a certain degree of respect, to let it be known that we're not attackers. We're not trying to be any new colonializers. We're not trying to be any new masters. But what we are trying to do is link up with like-minded Africans on the continent, because I mean there are a whole lot of people in the U.S., Canada, and the U.K. that we don't want to come with us. Um, we don't consider them to be of like mind either. Um, there's a group called the NGE here in America, 5% Nations of Gods and Earths, and they have a philosophy of 85, 10, and 5, which means that 85% of people, basically, they're just living their lives. They're not thinking really deep about anything. And I'm paraphrasing this. No 5 percenters say that's not exactly how the lessons go. I don't claim to knowledge 120 or anything like that. But 85% of the people normal people who are just trying to live their lives. 10% of people, they know the truth about things, but they hide the truth in an effort to manipulate and abuse the 85%. And then there are 5% of people who know the truth. And those 5%, they do everything they can to combat the lies of the 10%. But the 10%, of course, hates the 5% and the 85%, and they manipulate the 85% against the 5%. And W.E.B. Du Bois, he had a similar um, ideology. He called it the talented tenth. He believed that 10% of society were the intellectual thinkers. Now, what we have to understand is that everybody can't be a leader. Um, you got to have soldiers. I mean, we call each other king, and that's uplifting, and that's cool because we come from kings. But if everybody serves the role of the king, and then there are no other people to be in the kingdom, then how is that going to work? Me, I have no problem. If I know if somebody has a better idea than me, or they tell me I'm wrong about something, I can stop, I can evaluate it, and if they have a better idea, I can change my mind. A lot of people see that if as being weak, like I'm not gonna let anybody change my mind because that's a sign of weakness. It's exactly the opposite. When you're closed minded, you're weak. When you are open minded enough to evaluate facts and change a long standing idea that you had, then that is actually strength. That is um, being like water. Um, People see, water as not as being as aggressive as an element as, say, the sun or the wind. But if the water hits against a rock long enough, it's going to destroy the rock, and it maneuvers around and it gets where it needs to go. And so people need to be more like water. We can't have our heads in the sand. Like I have this idea, I have this idea, I have this idea, even though the idea isn't working. That makes no sense. Um, and the number one idea is whether or not Europeans and Asians are friends to Africans. What we have to understand is that they are not. Historically, they have proven that they are not. Malcolm X said, out of all of the subjects to be learned, history is the one that benefits us most, and that is true. It's just like if you were to loan somebody some money, you want to find out, do they have a history of paying people back? If five people, they borrow money from five people and then they pay none of those people back, you think they're going to pay you back? No, they're not. That's history. That's how you use history to find out what a person or people are going to do in the future. And Europeans and Asians have proven that they are not our friends. And like I say, don't get on here talking about your individual isolated experiences with a European over here or an Asian over there. Um, there are well-meaning people and beautiful people of all racial groups all over the planet, but that doesn't change the history of the overall group. I've had some excellent experiences with non African people. That doesn't blind me to the political reality of the fact that those are the enemies of African people. And it seems that when people in the diaspora try to explain this to people on the continent, you get mad at us and say that we are full of hate. But the thing is, we live in the beast, in the belly of the beast, with these people, and so we know how they are. We know their true nature. Um, when they come to the continent, they come sideways. They don't come direct. They come with smiles. They come with gifts. They pretend to be your friends. And then the whole time they're stealing from you. They're robbing you. They're molesting your children. Um, so, um, and so this idea of knowing exactly who the enemy of African people is something that we have to provide to the continent, and is one reason why European powers have always sought to divide African people away from African American people away from Africans on the continent. They never wanted us to get together because when Africans on the continent connect with Africans in the diaspora, they begin to see how bad these colonizers really are. Um, is like from Marcus Garvey to Kwame Nkrumah, um, and the list goes on and on. Um, they received enlightenment by living in the West and experiencing racism firsthand. And so I'm starting to feel like I'm rambling. This video is it's longer than I expected. I wanted it to be a quick one, but I just want to say that we need to bridge the gap that exists between tribes. We need to exist the gap that exists between uh, nations, and we need to um, uh, eliminate the gap that exists between continentals and diasporans because we are one people. The only problem we have ever had was a lack of unity. Slavery was caused by a lack of unity. Colonialization was caused by a lack of unity. The racism that we are experiencing now in the U.S. is a result of a lack of African unity and the uh, current conditions and economic conditions that Africans are suffering on the continent is due to a lack of African unity. That's our only problem. So we need to bridge all of these gaps so we can come together and be one. So with that being said, Asante Sana for watching and Kwaheri Kwasasa. Goodbye for now.